Welcome to On the Issues. I'm Councilman Jim Waring. Joining me on today's show is Interim Phoenix Police Chief Michael Sullivan. Chief Sullivan, welcome to the show. We really appreciate you making time to be on. Relatively new to the post. You started right after Labor Day, but long history in law enforcement in Louisville and Baltimore. Started, I think, in the early 1990s. I'm sure policing hasn't changed at all in your time, your time as an officer. But why don't you tell us a little bit about your background before you got to Phoenix?
No, absolutely. Councilman, thank you for having me here today. I've been in the business working on 29 years now, and there has been significant changes. The changes of how we do business as law enforcement has been pretty significant over the years. But where I came from, I started off with the Louisville City Police Department back in 1994. Spent 25 years there. During my time there, the city police and the county police merged to become a metro department. During my 25 years there, I did just a little bit of everything from being a patrol officer, a bike patrol officer, a street crimes detective, and then worked my way through the ranks and eventually was the Deputy Chief of Police, Chief of Staff for the department, or CAR 2. And then I had an opportunity to move to Baltimore and run operations as a Deputy Commissioner for Operations for Baltimore. And, I always joke that, that cushy retirement job in the city of Baltimore. It was a wonderful opportunity to work with Commissioner Harrison there, and in a very, very challenging environment that is very different than what we have here in Phoenix, but an opportunity to learn a lot during that time just because of the volume and the challenges that are present in that city.
Well, visited Baltimore more than a couple times, enjoyed the city thoroughly, a lot of history. The harbor area is just really pretty, nice stadiums, obviously Camden Yards. But there have also been some TV shows about policing in Baltimore that show kind of, I think, some of the challenges that you were facing. So applaud you for making that move, but we're glad to have you here. So you came to Phoenix, you've been on the job not even 6 months. Any observations, any thoughts about what's different, what changes have you made, where are we looking going forward?
This is an incredible department. And the men and women of this department and the people of this community have been so welcoming during my short time here. But we talk about differences in the departments, and there's certainly cultural differences in the different departments that I've worked in. But the challenges really bring us together because the challenges are the same. I think the last several years, departments across the country have seen rises in violent crime. The challenges around folks that are experiencing homelessness, addiction, and mental health. Those things coalescing to create some very, very tough social problems that many times are thrust upon the police to deal with. That's something that's being dealt with around the nation, no matter where you are, and we definitely are facing that here. With that increase in violence, you also see an increase in fatalities around traffic-related incidents. I think we see that here, and we saw a difference in driving patterns during the pandemic. I think across America, but certainly I think you see that here. And then the challenges, probably number one, is staffing. During the last several years, the challenges that we faced and we face here in Phoenix around staffing are real. We're below 2,600 sworn members right now. And we're working very, 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 very hard to change that. And I'm seeing positive changes right now in staffing. So the last few classes that we've hired, the last one was over 30. The next one's tracking to be close to that number as well. So bringing more folks in to the department, as well as retaining the folks and making sure that we keep folks around and value their experience is going to be important in the next several years.
Yeah, and for frame of reference for viewers, I think we budgeted for maybe 3,100 or so officers, so we're down 500 from what we expected to spend. We'd love to have 500 more officers, so if you're watching the show, you're interested in a job, contact my office, contact the chief, we'll get you hooked up, and if you get through all the testing and everything, we'd love to have you, but it is challenging. City's having problems hiring in a host of areas. I can certainly attest to what you said about the extreme behavior in driving. It's not everybody, but those few who are driving 70 and a 40 really kind of wreck it, no pun intended, for everybody else. Last time I checked, and I'm sure you'll correct me, but I think we had like 34 motor officers for the 500 square miles of Phoenix, and that's not enough. I'm sure that's down dramatically, but you guys have to prioritize, and you tend to prioritize, I don't think I'm wrong in saying this, going to violent crimes, which I hope makes sense to the viewers. But you talked about the challenges. Maybe we could get a little more in depth. When you struggle to hire officers, you can't just replace somebody who's been solving murders for 20 years with a rookie either. It doesn't work that way. So how long does it take an officer to get to the point where they can handle really tough cases or do some really intensive investigations?
The training's very rigorous, so when you enter the department, from the time you start to the academy until you're really on your own is almost a year before you're a fully functioning officer. And then what it takes to become a high-level investigator can take 4 or 5 years of experience on the street to be able to roll into some of those specialty details and be very effective in those areas. It's going to be a little bit different for everybody, depending on what your motivation is and your willingness and your dedication. But certainly, you don't become a skilled investigator or even a skilled patrolman just when you hit the street. So, the problem that we have with staffing right now didn't happen overnight. It won't be fixed overnight, but there are promising signs with the additional hiring. Attrition has stayed, the past year fairly stable compared to what it has been in previous years. In 2021, though, that's where we just really lost, a significant number of people. We lost over 271 folks left the department, and that year I believe we only hired just over 70. So that huge number in that year is really what we're fighting to catch up on right now.
Yeah, and certainly this predates your time. Obviously, you're the person here who's now in charge of fixing it, might be not the right word, but improving the situation for sure. Can you talk about some of the steps that were taken to try to make the job more attractive? Because that's really what it is. We can increase the pay, we can do a lot of things, but if people decide they don't want to be a Phoenix police officer, we can't make them do it. So what are we doing to change that narrative?
Well, and first off, let me start by thanking you and your colleagues for making us the highest paid police department in the state of Arizona, which I believe is compensation is well due given the work that we do here in Phoenix. It's very important to have that compensation package. But what I say all the time is people don't come necessarily or stay for compensation packages. They stay for the working conditions that you have in a department. Those working conditions are the patrol car that you drive, the computer and printer that are in your car, the facilities that you come to at the end of the day. I know we're working hard to improve those, and I know that the council is working hard to give us the ability to improve some of our stations and some of our facilities. But until that point, we're going to do everything we can within our power, within the department, to improve those working conditions. The other part that I think is very important is to focus on wellness. We have folks that are focused on our officers' wellness. They go to some of the most horrific scenes and see things that people really shouldn't ever have to see and deal with on a regular basis, whether it's the death of a child, horrible traffic accidents, and having to deal with that every day weighs on folks. And making sure that we have the proper support there to support our people with our EAU unit. We do that every single day, and we'll continue to lean into that, because I think that that's very important to make sure the folks that know that officers on the department's sworn and professional staff have the support they need to do this very difficult work.
Well, I appreciate you focusing on that. I've had specific officers, including one who led a large organization here, not in Phoenix, but in the state of Arizona, talking about the things that you see, which you don't necessarily think about, in accident scenes and so forth, babies being killed and so forth, just horrible stuff that you don't think about, like, you see TV procedurals or something, you think the murders or some terrible scene there. So that is something that we have tried to focus on, and to make it a more attractive job, and certainly appreciate the dedication of the young people. Primarily it's young people who apply. But then keeping them is also a thing. We had an older force, that a lot of retirement eligible people, and now we're in the situation we're in, which takes us back to traffic. We just don't have enough officers to put them all around the city when we're spread out like we are, which is an intractable problem. Can't change the size of the city. So, another issue that I know is pretty time intensive It is something that probably I could have knocked on a lot of doors 10 years ago and it wouldn't have got mentioned. And now I would say it's front and center is the homeless situation. You want to talk a little bit about, and I'm not expecting you to get into all the lawyerese, but what you guys encounter in terms of addressing those issues in terms of the law. Like, what can you do and what can't you do? Because people do ask that a lot of me.
No, certainly. And, one of the things that we talk about all the time is, homelessness it's not a crime. Just being in those situations, being unsheltered is not a crime in and of itself. Now, because of situations, we encounter folks that are in those circumstances, that are involved in crime. And when we talk about crime, thefts, assaults, those types of things are very, very important to deal with. The challenge comes in areas around trespass, and those types of areas that, I think we could all agree are fairly minor crimes, unless it's your property that the trespassing is occurring on, then it can be a very major issue.
And not every shopping center gives you guys permission to go say, hey, you're trespassing. They're not trespassing unless the owner says so, correct?
And that's correct. Yeah. And, we have limited resources to be able to do that, and focus. We could probably focus all day long if we focused necessarily on trespassing. We'd have to lead with services, and I know it's a challenge, and our folks go out there every day, and sometimes they offer services to folks and to get them on the right path, and get turned down over and over and over again. But for those folks that we are able to get services, that are able to find a path out, it's something we have to do. But what we find is what I talked about earlier is these co-occurring situations where it's not just homelessness, it's addiction and mental health issues that truly are driving this issue here in Phoenix and across America. And to be perfectly honest, police, we're a blunt tool with enforcement to be able to deal with that. We really need to have a more robust social safety net to be able to help folks and get them where they need to be. But there are certainly going to be times when folks go the other side that we're going to prosecute and make sure that the rule of law is upheld.
And so the viewers understand, if there's somebody on a street corner, panhandling with a sign or whatever, you guys just don't get to go and arrest them. It doesn't work that way. There are court cases about that. So that's not an option. I understand people call and say, well, that person's acting a little strange and so forth, but they're within their rights to be out there, and it's not something that you guys can really address, you guys meaning the force.
No, absolutely. And, with our staffing challenges, that makes it even more challenging. But, when we go up, what we can do is can be limited by current law, current case law, and all those things. But we also want to be compassionate in the way we do our work. Our work is significant, and I tell people all the time, when they join the police force, and I'm talking to new recruits, and I want to arm them with, something that I think will benefit them throughout their career. This career truly is about service. It's not about enforcing every law. We wouldn't get from the station 2 miles from the precinct any day if we looked to deal with each violation of law and ordinance that we deal with. We need to focus on preventing and controlling crime and providing public safety to the folks here locally and justice to victims of crime. So many times that means using law enforcement, but probably more of our encounters involve mediating and finding solutions to problems. So we really want to be problem solving and find longer term solutions rather than dealing with each of these individual situations, and working with counsel to be able to do that is critically important.
Well, I can tell you from personal experience, having been on several ride-alongs over the years, you're not embellishing about the 2 miles. I don't think on any of those that we had got 2 miles without, and it wasn't penny-ante stuff either. One of them was a shooting, wound up following the police helicopter, literally like right out of the box. For anybody who's done a ride-along, particularly at night, in the city, it's not for the faint-hearted, even if you're just riding along. I mean, it's really something. It's a very physically demanding job and very emotionally taxing for the things that you either have to see and address or just the adrenaline factor. So one thing, though, that I think viewers probably will think about, because it's just so tragic and it seems so omnipresent now, is safety in schools. Can you talk a little bit about the school resource program and how you interact with schools and how does that relationship work?
You know, I go back to when my daughter was in school, and you know, the one thing that she remembers is the school resource officer, and that school resource officer, you know, that she knew by name, knew personally. You know, to me, it talks about building relationships and how that can be important. You know, school safety is critically important, and to have somebody there in the school. But when we talk about safety, it's about teaching what is safe and what isn't safe, and being a resource. And truly, it's in the name, school resource officers. We're a resource to the education system if we're there and available. You know, I think that the program can be very valuable. I understand also that there's different models, and we're working with different folks throughout the community to look what those different models could be. You know, the models could be a regional response. Obviously, we have staffing issues, and putting officers in every school, if they wanted that, would be extremely challenging for us. But it's really about engagement, making sure that schools have school safety plans, and that they message those to the students and the families, and make sure that there is a plan in place in case, you know, that really bad day does happen. We're in conversations with administrators throughout the Phoenix area to make sure that we can provide the best safety we can, and that they can come up with the best safety plans that they can.
So schools come to you, ask for advice. Do they ever say, hey, this is the layout of our school, do you have any suggestions? Is that the way it works?
You know, that's part of that engagement. Part of the engagement is whether they want school resource officers or not, or if, you know, potentially a regional response is what they're looking for school safety. Different schools, just like different communities, have different needs and different desires. So we go in, and one of the things that I've always encouraged, and that the folks that work different areas understand and meet the people that work in these schools. You know, I think that's critically important. The first time that you go into a school, if it shouldn't be when something bad's happening. I talk all the time when I talk to community groups about FBI, and people look at me in the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I'm going to know friends before incidents. So I want to be friends and familiar before an incident occurs. I don't want the first time that to occur, you know, on the back of a squad car on a really bad day, and I'm meeting you. And I've had that philosophy from the time I was a beat officer to where I am today. So as you ride your areas, being able to be familiar with the geography and the potential issues, I think, is critically important, and something we do and will continue to strive to do.
So we are, as we speak, we're you know, in Super Bowl mode, I guess you'd say, and but it's not. It might be the biggest event, but we have a lot of big events. The Final Four, obviously the big golf tournament every year. How does that impact the department? Like, where do the resources come from? The game is actually in Glendale, but a lot of the activities, a lot of the people coming here are staying within Phoenix's boundaries. How does that impact the department? It's got to be taxing on resources, and obviously there's always the threat of terrorism or something terrible happening, and we host a lot of these events. We've kind of become sort of famous for it. So what do you tell people when people say, hey, what kind of special preparations do you
Well, the preparations, I can tell you, started about 1.5 years ago to get to where we are today. So this was not planning that just started up last week or last month. Significant work has gone on over the period of time, and the experience that we've had from previous Super Bowls really help us to be able to navigate this. But we couldn't do it without state, local, and federal partners. That partnership that we have with other departments that are coming in and helping us, and our federal partners, is significant. And we are well prepared. We're well prepared. I'm excited for the world to see what Phoenix has to offer, because we have a lot to offer. We're really going to be a showcase, because the major events outside the game itself are all here in Phoenix. The staffing, let me assure our folks that are out there living in different areas, aren't going to touch patrol staffing. You know, we have some folks that are off that work patrol that will be assigned to the event, you know, working extra days. And there'll be some long, long days by the men and women of the Phoenix Police Department, but we're willing to do that to make sure that we have a terrific event. We showcase all that this city has to offer.
Yeah. I went as a younger person long before my elected official days. I went to the one in Tempe in January of 1996. Can't believe it was that long ago. it was just a whole different thing. I mean, they did have the NFL experience, but it was really a very small thing right outside the stadium and the north parking lot. It doesn't look anything like the production that you see now. And by then, the Super Bowl was always one of the highest rated shows in history. Pretty much every new one broke some new record. So it's not like it was a new thing then, but in the almost 30 years since, it's gotten to be just a major international event. And obviously it's great for Phoenix to be participating and hosting it, but it does take on resources. So I want to assure people that, you're still going to respond to calls in North Phoenix if something happens. Not everybody's out at the stadium in Glendale. And you mentioned something that I was hoping you'd bring up and thought you would, the partnerships with other law enforcement agencies. This is not Phoenix or Glendale going it alone. It doesn't work that way. So
Absolutely, we couldn't do it without partnerships.
Yeah. It's too big of a bite of a sandwich to swallow whole by ourselves. So, no, I'm going to ask this question, and the answer, I'll tell you in advance, cannot be Chief of the Phoenix Police Department. So setting that aside, you've had a lot of experience. I've talked to a lot of officers about their experiences. Some are like, oh, I love being a motorcycle officer. I love this or I love that. I'm curious, what was your favorite job except for being Phoenix Police Chief?
Wow. I've had so many great jobs. I spoke about my time being a bike patrol officer. Outside the confines of the car, really close to the community. I think that was a very significant work that I really enjoyed. I also enjoyed my time as a street crimes detective, really dealing with some of the significant crime that went on, engaging community in some really challenging situations. Those were the times that you get really close with the folks that you work with. And lifelong friends, that I still talk to today about the work we did back then and, how important that work was to keep communities safe. So, as I talk about my work as an officer and detective, those two things stand out, head and shoulders above everything else. But then as I've gone through, I've had opportunities to really be able to engage with community. And that's the opportunity when you're able to unplug a little bit as a commander. And probably one of the most significant places to be in your development as a police executive is as that precinct commander. My time as a precinct commander, you get to engage with local elected officials, community groups, and you're close enough to the men and women do the work and see the difference in that work. So, as I've gone through the ranks, I think, those two positions as a young officer, but then being able to really see the work that officers are doing every day at that precinct commander level is, something that was very, I look back as very important in my development, but I really enjoyed that work as well.
Well, I can tell you were absolutely right about that. You won't get 2 miles without doing something when you're in a police car. I can also say you're right about the police commander and elected official relationship, because I work with those folks a lot. They've always been just outstanding. Really, really appreciate their service. It's a tough job, but we get a lot of requests from citizens, and a lot of times we're passing it on not to the chief, but to the commanders. And I always have a lot of respect for them. So I appreciate that answer, because that kind of tracks with everything I've seen. They really do get involved in the community. They go to HOA meetings with me. You've been to HOA meetings with me, but when you were there, so was a commander. And so that relationship, I really think, is a bridge between the citizenry and the police. I think is a paramount importance. Also, the CAOs, the folks who interact with the communities, we've had a great relationship with them up in District 2, so really appreciate them as well. It's really been outstanding. But now I've got to ask you one kind of silly question that I've never thought to ask. I've had other chiefs on and other police officers on who aren't chiefs. So is there any relation between the TV detective and being a real detective? Do you ever look at it? I'm thinking of this in part because I just wrote a mystery that was centered around a U.S. Senate race. And it's a dated book. It was a book from years gone by, but I thought it actually took great pains to be pretty accurate about what running a campaign is like. And it occurs to me, is there ever anything you read that you're like, oh yeah, that happened to me, or that's something that I can relate to? Or maybe you just don't read those books because it's too close to home.
No, certainly when you watch or read, it doesn't put in what you see day to day, hour to hour. But there certainly are pieces and different, whether it be TV shows or books, that really highlights what that work looks like. But the vast majority of the day of the work that we do every single day can be somewhat routine, especially when it comes to detective work. It really comes down to combing through piles and piles of evidence to try to find that piece that you need to be able to put a case together. Reading over transcripts. You sit in an interview with somebody, and all of a sudden when you go through the transcripts, you are able to pick something out that you didn't pick up during that initial conversation. Those aren't exciting things that usually make it to TV or are talked about in books that are out there, but that's, the day-to-day work that detectives do is really about that investigative curiosity and really being willing to dig deep and look for different areas. It probably doesn't get picked up in most of those, whether it's a TV show or books.
Yeah, they've only got an hour, so, but
Right.
no, I was curious because I wondered if you ever read stuff like that, and if you did, kind of what did you think? Because it is hard to kind of catch the flavor of it. I found the same thing about books about politics. They don't, the people writing them usually aren't actually running campaigns themselves, so it's a little bit different. It's what they're observing, and it's always interesting to see what they pick up. Anything you'd like to tell viewers about, sort of where we're going from here, what your goals are? It said interim in your introduction, but you're the chief now. So I'm interested in the here and now and where we go from here. And I just think, at some point, your goals matter more than whatever might come next. So how is it looking? What do you think is going to happen going forward?
I spoke about it earlier. My goals when I go out and speak, whether it's the men, women that are doing this work every single day, we kind of lost our way in this profession over the last several years. A lot of noise that was out there, but we need to focus on preventing and controlling crime, providing public safety, and providing justice to victims. Everything we do should center around that. One of the things that you're going to see from me is a crime plan that's my folks are working to put together, and after the Super Bowl, we'll be able to have conversations about that. It's really hard to play a game without a game plan. Focusing on those most dangerous places and the small number of people that are really causing us challenges and issues going forward, and then addressing some of those other issues that we've talked about today, whether that are around addiction and some of the other social issues that we have to deal with and operate in. But really focusing on why we exist, why we're here. And we can only do that with the help of community. That's why our CAOs are so important. That's why the work at the precinct level is so important, because they develop those relationships with community.
And so, not to put you on the spot, but obviously officer resources, because of the shortage of officers, have been redistributed. I'm in a district that's geographically dispersed, so you can't change the amount of time it takes to drive. You can drive a little bit faster on Tatum, but basically if it's 10 miles away, it's going to take you a while to get to the crime scene. If you had the 500 officers, how would you distribute those officers? Like, what would you think is the number one priority?
I really go with workload-based approach, but there's certain areas that we certainly have been depleted over the last several years. Whether it would be our CAOs, those ranks I think are critically important, connection to community and focused on those goals. We talked about motors earlier. I think we're down to 44 motors last count. There used to be over 150. So, those two areas are critically important, but first and foremost is going to make sure that we're staffing patrol and we have the ability to have patrol get out and do the work, but still have the time to engage in community, not just run from 911 call to 911 call. So, yeah,
those rising response times, which is what you get when you have a shortage of officers, is something that I think we're all working to try to address. I know they brief us at the Public Safety Committee every month, and I'm glad things are looking up a little bit, but it needs to go up with a bullet, and hopefully we'll get more accomplished here in the coming months. But Chief, we're out of time. I really appreciate it. I'm sure the audience will appreciate hearing your views, and I really appreciate you making the time to be on the show. And if you have any questions or comments, please call my office at 602-262-7445 or visit my website at Phoenix.gov district 2. And we look forward to seeing you next time on The Issues.